E hora te marino kia whakapapa pounamu te moana hei huarahi mā tātou I rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou e tātou katoa, haumi e hui e, taiki e. Talofa lava, ni sambolo vinaka, whakalofalahi atu, whakatalofa atu, kia orana, maloi lei, maloni, kia ora koutou, mihi mahana kia koutou katoa, no mai ki tō mātou kōrero. I'm Moira Clooney, I'm project lead for Te Ngako Kahukura, and so pleased to welcome you back into our space today. And this week, vai aso o le Ngangana Samoa, Samoan Language Week, for the third in our Takatapui and Rainbow webinar series for the youth sector across Aotearoa. Today's kōrero is about working with Rainbow Pasifika young people and communities, and I'm joined by my colleague Jono Selu to speak to that. But before I introduce them, I wanted to just say a little bit about Te Ngako Kahukura and what we're about. So we are a national initiative that sits in partnership between Rainbow Communities and Aotearoa, which is the national peak body for the youth sector. We want Rainbow young people to grow up feeling safe, feeling like they're valued and that they belong in all the places where they live and learn and access healthcare and social support and connect with their friends. This sounds really simple. It sounds like a kaupapa that everyone shares, but unfortunately it's still a really big kaupapa. There's still a lot of work to do. Our team works at a systems change level, so we work with people and organisations who influence the systems around young people, funders, politicians, researchers, training providers, sector bodies, government agencies, youth services, and people who work one-on-one with young people and their whanau to really grow understanding of rainbow populations and issues and to help people to do the work that's needed within their sphere of influence. Dr. Elizabeth Kerekere, who appeared on our first webinar, gave us a whakatauki that speaks to our work, which is up on the screen, kia puawai me puawai. So for our Rainbow young people to flourish and to thrive, we must grow, we must do the work. And I was thinking too about the Samoan Language Week theme for this year. I hope we get this right, Popo te lotoi whale, ola manuia le ano whale, which is strengthen the posts of your house for all to thrive. So our work is about helping people really put in that groundwork to strengthen their services, to strengthen the systems that they create, and to grow their practice. And we've created this webinar series for anyone who works with young people across Aotearoa, whether that's directly working with young people in their whanau or supporting youth at more of a policy or management level. With this series, we want to get into some conversations that are a little bit deeper than the kind of 101 introductory stuff. So we might not necessarily cover off all the questions that you have today. I encourage you to check out our website, read more, and please do get in touch if you want to ask us anything else. For today, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A section. That's the easiest way for us to see it. And you're also welcome to use the chat if you want to introduce yourself or talk to each other or add any thoughts. Just make sure that you have it set to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see it. So that's us. Let's get into it. Our speaker today is Jono Selu, as I said. Jono is of Samoan, Scottish and English heritage, born and bred in West Auckland. They're a queer social activist with a particular interest in intersectionality and identity formation. Jono has a background in health promotion and education, specialising in sexual health, sexual violence prevention, sexuality and gender identity, mental health and decolonisation. Jono has a Masters of Applied Social Work from Massey University and currently works with me as practice lead at Te Ngako Kahukura, and in his spare time he creates stuff. So Jono, the kaupapa for today, as I said, is about working with Pasifika Rainbow young people. Do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself and how you've worked with Pasifika Rainbow young people?
Inga male angalele male lofa male whalawali o tatou atua o te whaatalo whaatu I paia male mamalu mau mai langi e mama o lo ingoio ngā kanga selu au te saumai au ki langi sisifo o lo te Māori Samoa, lo tina o le pālangi tā lava. So su mai, a whio mai, maliu mai ai, tala mai a au, i le ngei whongokanga i le Zoom. Um, it is a pleasure to be able to have these conversations and be in this space. And so, even though I work for Te Ngākau Kahukura, thank you for having me on to be able to talk about something that is really close to not only my life and my experience, but also my heart. So, I to everyone that is listening in today or who will listen in, just big alofa and greetings from my ancestors to all of your ancestors. Um, so, a little bit about me. Oh, yeah, also, ia manguila vai asolinga ana Samoa, vi ia o tātou tua that we are able to hold on to those gifts as our ancestors built a fale for us so that we could all thrive. Now is our job to build that fale for uh, our descendants to continue thriving in the future. So, a little bit about me. Um, well, I am of Samoan heritage from the villages of Ailu'utai in the district of Aana and Sapungawa in the district of Falealili, both on the island, the beautiful island of Bolu over in Samoa. And on my mother's side, I hail from, always get this wrong, Hamilton in Glasgow over in Scotland and Ilford in London over in England. Um, and so even growing up, I kind of joked about that 1/4 of my identity colonized the other 3/4 at various points throughout history. And so I constantly have this tension of walking between those spaces, but that's helped me to build to where I am and where I sit today as a living, breathing human. Um, I was born and bred on the lands of Te Kawara Wāmaki out here under the beautiful mountain range that is the Waitakere Ranges. And yeah, I grew up getting to kind of run around in the bush a lot and go hiking and um, camping up in the mountains, which again helped to grow me to the point that I am today as well. Um, so although I never got the opportunity to grow up in my homeland, I did get to grow up close to environment, and that has impacted on the way that I think about our communities and the way our identities formed, um, which incidentally is part of the decolonisation process for me as well. um, Professionally speaking, I have a background in, as Moira said, all of those things, in sexual violence prevention and education, in comprehensive sexuality education, um, more recently in the mental health space, and the lived experience space as well for mental health and distress, and also on a more casual basis in rainbow spaces, talking specifically about sexuality, gender identity, and sex characteristics, and the kind of human rights as elements of that. Um, I am a trained social worker, and so that has been an interesting journey because my professional background actually started in more community based activist work, and community development and youth development, and then progressed into social work, which I think of more broadly in the context of community development rather than um, that sort of traditional idea of social work, which tends to be more client based work. Um, Huge respect for anybody that does client based work, but I feel that my calling is always into that spaces of building communities, um, giving support where it's needed, and then kind of, cool, you got it, sweet as. Where else am I needed? Where else am I useful? Um, as part of my social work qualification, I wrote a thesis that looked at uh, gay and bisexual Pacific men's experiences of school-based support services, um, which was a tough one to actually write up. Granted that I was talking about my own experiences and the experiences of people that I hold nearest and dearest to me. And so I kind of went in knowing what I was going to find out about because I'd heard about it. But what I knew is that we just in in the in the context of rainbow Pasifika communities, even though that term can be problematic in and of itself, um, we we don't have enough research at the moment, and so that informed a lot of the drive to produce something that could be used by communities or useful for our communities, um, rather than research on our communities, and that would highlight the things that I knew from talking with friends and other people who are in my kind of professional realms, about what is needed in those spaces. So yeah, um, that's the kind of more extended version about who I am. Uh, yeah.
Cool. Thanks for that. Um, I'm thinking about your thesis and your work background. What are some of the things you think are important for youth workers to know in terms of working with Rainbow Pacific young people? What did you find out in your thesis, or what are some of the things that you know from the young people you've worked with? I know that's a big question.
It is a big question. I'm like, where do I start? Um, so as I said, there's not a lot of research out there at the moment. There is more coming, and I absolutely celebrate the fact that we have amazing academics out there who are stepping into our spaces, and spaces from their own lived experience as well. It's oh, there's so many threads that I'm pulling on at the moment, but one of them is around the fact that our communities, our people as Rainbow Pasifika folks, are stepping into our communities and saying we need to have research out there to explore what are the needs of our communities. I'm gonna go back a little bit, and I will come to the youth work things that youth workers might need to know. But the things that I'm thinking about in the context of research, and this is one of the things that sits really heavily with me anytime I think about doing research or even things like a survey, is that a lot of the stuff that does exist so far, um, is kind of armchair anthropology, really. It's looking at our communities from an outsider lens and writing about what is a whawhawhingi, what is a whakareiti akabaine, what do those experiences look like in the context of um, of the Pacific nations, and it frustrates me because it, it I find it buys into that sort of dusky maiden narrative, um, of exoticization of our people, um, and also kind of positions it as if, oh, this is a thing from the past, and we need to look at that thing from the past and write about it, rather than exploring what is needed by our communities now. We have contemporary communities who are diaspora here in Aotearoa, over in Australia, also in particular on the west coast of the United States. And there are clear disparities. Our identities sit at the intersection of being a rainbow person, whatever that means, and being a Pacific person, where it's not inherent that we're marginalized, but there is a clear and obvious thread of marginalization, um, experiences of things like racism, all of those ism words that relate to how identities operate in the context of Western patriarchal capitalist, all of the things society. So I think it's one of those things where it's nice to be able to explore what our communities' identities look like and what yeah, where they're grounded, but we really do need to be thinking about what's needed in our communities. How do people in our support services adequately serve our communities? Um, and very much like Takatapui, for our for our Rainbow Pasifika peoples, we have Pacific identities first. Those are the things that tie us to our families, which can be points of pain as well, but they can also be points of strength. They can be the places that we ground ourselves in, the places that we find that sense of home. Um, whether that's speaking our language, for those of us that uh, are able to, in whatever capacity, um, or if that whether that's going home or simple things like I know, and maybe it's just because I'm getting old, but I know that hearing the songs that my dad listened to while I was growing up, from Samoan bands from the 50s through to the 80s, which when I was growing up I was like, ugh, dad's listening to music again. Now I'm like, ah, this gives me a sense of home. This gives me a sense of identity. This grounds me in my genealogy and my ngafa, um, and that's important to me, um, because it helps me figure out where in the world do I exist, and how do I navigate the world, and through what lenses am I seeing the world. So, I think it's one of those things of when we as professionals are wanting to serve our our rainbow young people who are of Pacific heritage, um, we need to really consider what is important to them, what is relevant for them right in this moment, rather than taking an approach of, okay, I've got my checklists of things I need to do. We've started our, especially if you'll say in a client meeting, and you start off with, okay, should we open with prayer? Well, is that useful? Or does that young person not want to do that? Does this young person want to speak to me? Why should this young person trust me, especially if this is our first meeting? Why should they trust me and like want to tell me all the things that's going on for them? Um, I feel like I've gone off track a bit. Started ranting, but those are the key kind of considerations to think about. So, in the context of youth workers, starting to explore how do we do youth work in the context of our rainbow young people who are of Pacific heritage, there's some key things that came out of my research. And I want to acknowledge they're not the one and only things, but they are key points that the young people I interviewed said this would be really great to have seen. Things like visibility. Do we have rainbow young people? Oh, sorry, do we have rainbow Pasifika people actually being shown to our communities within schools or youth spaces? Is there visibility, like, of brownness in those spaces where you're creating those support spaces? Support systems. So I'm not always an advocate for having a poster up and that being it, but sometimes posters are the first point that a young person can see this environment might be safe for me. And one of the things that came out of my research was that um, almost all of my participants noted that they didn't know they were allowed to be queer because of the fact that every time they saw queer representation, whether that was on posters in the counselor's office or in people that came in to speak to their schools or even on TV and in their kind of community settings, all of those people were white, and so in some cases it delayed their process of realizing, oh, actually, I'm queer and that's allowed to be because that is just something that's part of who I am. So that visibility, whilst it needs to have action behind it, is still important. Um, the other key point there is coming and doing things like this, coming to webinars, having conversations with other professionals who have the lived experience. And I can't stress that enough, but the lived experience of being a queer, trans, or intersex brown person, as a Pacific person, because those are the places that you can build your knowledge about what do those experiences look like, and they are diverse, just as diverse as we have uh, Pacific languages throughout the entirety of that our giant and beautiful moana. Um, we have that kind of a diversity in the context of our experiences of our identities. Um, and then there's all your basics like checking in with pronouns and if that's relevant, checking in with identity labels. What does our young person want to identify as, and how do we respect that? And are there name changes that they would prefer to be called by a different name rather than the name that might be, especially if you're in a school setting, than the name that's given to you by given to the school by their parents when they were registered, and all of those kinds of things are really relevant. Fundamentally, have conversations with your young people that don't start from a place of assumption. Um, yeah, those are kind of the basics, really.
Cool, thank you. I'm thinking about your point around visibility and how services can make sure that that's done in a way that's not tokenistic. You talked about the diversity of the population as well, and I feel like I'm a little bit older than you. I feel like when I was growing up, I was aware of whawhawhine as an identity. I think that that's something that I knew about in terms of Pacific rainbow identities. But that's about as far as it went. And I wonder whether, yeah, do you think that there's potentially something in there around the visibility that's needed for young people to be able to see themselves?
So many, so many.
Sorry, that's a few
No,
questions, I think.
so many thoughts, and I appreciate you bringing that up because there's a couple things tied in here. So, uh, yes, we need more visibility. No, we're not. We are not your tick box in your making signs and you're making posters. Um, and I think one thing that might be really useful as a start point is um, this sounds really heavy, but decolonizing your mind when it comes to sexuality and gender identity, um, because our framing is not. You can't take our framing and map it onto um, a, a, a Western framework of sexuality, gender identity, and sex characteristics. They look different because they come from our culture. They are grounded in millennia worth um, of social existence. And so when we talk about, and this applies in the context of Maori as well, remembering that Maori here in Aotearoa are part of our moana. Um, and so a lot of the things that would have been talked about in the Takatapui webinar will still have relevance in the context of Pacific communities, especially diaspora Pacific communities here in Aotearoa. Um, but terms and phrases or identities um, whaafine, whakaleiti, akawaine, mahu, wakasalewa, palopa, whaatama, um, all of our indigenous identities. It's important that we celebrate those and that those become visible. But if you're going to create visibility, you like I said, if you create visibility, you need to back that up with action. Um, you need to be authentic in the, like, if you're engaging in that, it's not put a person on a poster just because, oh, we need to tick our diversity card. But you need to then say, okay, cool, well, what are we doing in that space? How are we adequately supporting those communities? Um, what do we even know about what that looks like? So, and no, just knowing about the ballroom scene or Vogue is not knowing about the existence of our queer Pacific identities. Um, so dig a bit deeper, and I say that with alofa, with love, but dig a bit deeper into that and um, explore what is out there. There is not enough, but it doesn't mean that there's nothing out there in terms of our communities. Um, and I think we one of my kind of life missions is to help build some of that stuff up, so that it becomes more visible. Um,
Yeah, I feel like something that's maybe starting to change in the last few years is with social media being so prevalent, that's giving people more of a platform to share their own stories and experiences and identities. And I guess I'm seeing a lot more people starting to share more about themselves in a social media space, and also um, like little documentaries and news pieces and things on YouTube popping up that are more from like people's own perspective rather than from, like you were saying, that kind of anthropological perspective where it's like this is what these identities mean from the outside looking in. Yeah, what are some of the places that you might suggest people look for if they want to connect more with learning more about Rainbow Pacific identities?
well, thankfully, we have some beautiful humans who have started a research project, and rather than sending you to about 7 billion different places, I'm going to point everyone in the direction of the Manalangi Project. Um, there, on the website, there is a whole list of resources. They've started to build a bit of a database around research that's relevant in the context of actually taking action, and how to adequately support, and also, in some cases, what our communities actually look like now, rather than this kind of um, uh, what is the whawhine of old. It's, well, what do my sisters look like now? Where is our community in a contemporary Aotearoa context, in a contemporary Australia context, in a contemporary US context, in a contemporary Pacific context back in our homelands as well. So that I think is probably at the top of my mind, the best place to find a wide range of things, and also to get involved with that research, especially if you have Rainbow Pasifika young people who are who you work with, or who you are friends with, or um, happen to know in the broader range of your communities or your work contexts, is to connect them up with that research, because that's looking at the health and well-being of Rainbow Pasifika communities across Aotearoa now, and uh, is a piece of research that I'm very excited about, um, because it's realistically like the first of its kind, as far as I know, in terms of its breadth and depth across an Aotearoa population. Um,
Cool,
I
thank you. Yeah, that is such an exciting project, and I think particularly like we're starting to learn more from a research perspective about rainbow experiences in Aotearoa and about Pacific experiences, and there've been, research gaps in both of those spaces, but like so little that's known from a research perspective and like from a in terms of stats that you're able to kind of quote at people. Around Rainbow Pacific identity. So that's such an exciting project. I've just dropped the link in the chat here and we'll share it on the website later as well. Um, I'm wondering, you've talked a couple of times about decolonisation and I guess youth workers in Aotearoa are often used to thinking about decolonisation in terms of te ao Māori and te tiriti o Waitangi and yeah, and Māori communities. I wondered if you wanted to talk a bit more about what decolonisation means to you in terms of Rainbow Pacifica and what that looks like in Aotearoa as well.
Yes, and I think also as part of that, I see we've got a question that's come through, and I will work that question into this answer as well because I think it's very connected. So decolonization has become a buzzword in our kind of contemporary space, and I'm always aware of that because it becomes one of it almost feels like a bit of virtue signaling around um, you can be a better person if you decolonize, and that's you know if you're authentically doing that, that's true, but it is a broad ranging and complex process that requires you to um, think broadly and even in a lot of cases acknowledge that it stops being a process and ends up being a cycle of explore and undo and rebuild and explore and undo and rebuild. So decol is a rough journey, and it looks really different for different folks. I think in particular it looks different in the context of, to kind of boil it down and summarize it, it looks different in the context of Indigenous folks doing decol work to non-Indigenous folks doing decol work in the context of each culture. So, like, one of the first things that we can even think about that was, I think, one of my first realizations is that the Pacific is not one thing. And the separation of Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia is not a Pacific thing. It doesn't come from our communities. It doesn't come from our histories. It comes from Western colonization and colonial perspectives on dividing our world up. Um, but our people didn't think like that. In fact, um, in my understanding, and I might be wrong, but from what I understand as part of our history, if you look at a map of the world and then you find the Pacific Ocean and then you flip it upside down, that's how we saw the Pacific rather than the way that it's framed up now. My ancestors were geniuses. They navigated the biggest ocean in the world and populated all of these tiny islands that if you zoom all the way out to look at the world, you can't see. They built science around how to navigate those spaces. They built science on how to live on those islands, how to look at the stars and interpret what's coming up, how to track the seasons, how to talk about horticulture and um, fishing, like ocean maintenance. They thought about ecology and built entire systems around looking after our planet and why we should do that. Like there is, it always gives me chills, and I'm getting goosebumps now thinking about the breadth of knowledge that lives in our spaces. And then I think back to when I was in high school and primary school and even university. I wasn't taught those things. Um, I wasn't opened up opportunities to think about those those geniuses. I got taught about, um, again, to summarize it down, old white men from who died like a good couple of millennia ago, um, and what that knowledge looks like, and I got taught about empirical evidence and what the scientific process looks like. And that's not to say that information is wrong, but it does mean that the knowledge that comes from my own people, in which in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of like just up the road on a 3 or 4 hour plane ride from here. Um, that knowledge I didn't get to learn about. when I think in the context of our rainbow spaces, um, I feel the same thing comes up a lot. We don't get to hear about the complexities of rainbow Pasifika identities. Um, Talking to my own experience, I and this feels so stupid to admit as well, but when I was first realizing that I was queer, I had this epiphany that, oh my god, yup, totally queer, yay, found something else out about myself. And then in the split second afterwards, oh god, how do I operate in the context of my family? Um, Back then, we in my family, as far as I'm aware, we have no one who is whawhawhinge. We have no out queer people. There are likely to be a few based on stats in my family, but nobody is out and queer or openly queer. Um, and it was never talked about in my family context either. So for a while there, I had this kind of panic moment of thinking, am I the only queer Samoan? Am I the only... Because again, I couldn't see anybody else around me. It took me from the point that I realized I was queer to the point that I found rainbow Pasifika communities was about 3, maybe 4 years. Um, and that was rough because I didn't know how to operate. Um, in my personal story, so this is the crossover to conservative slash religious views. I was going to church at that point in time. I was in a Samoan church, and I was always worried somebody would find out, and I didn't know how to operate in the context of being a queer Pacific person and uh, a church member. So I struggled with that kind of interaction and felt that I ended up living two different lives, where I had my church life, where I'd be at church and I was in the choir and I was in youth group and I was um, at church every Sunday and was around church people all the time. And then I had my other life, which was kind of like my nightlife, where I was around my queer communities and um, like trying to figure out what that meant for me. Um, Now, I in retrospect, I feel a lot luckier than I know a lot of our communities have to deal with, where church is even a more part of their life, um, and in some cases, come talking about who you are or exploring who you are is not allowed. Um, but I do want to highlight that the conservative views that exist in our communities don't always map on to how people experience their family life as well. So there is a lot more of a complex uh, narrative that exists in the context of when we're talking about conservatism or church identities in rainbow spaces. When we're talking Pacific, colonization meant that the church took over, and that's a broad version of the church. That's all of the churches, but Christianity became an embedded part of our Pacific lives and experiences right throughout all of our cultural paradigms. Um, but it doesn't mean that there's no space for our rainbow folks. Trying to answer this succinctly, and it's a really big discussion, and I would love to have it at some point in time if people are interested, in a more like sitting around having chats rather than a webinar kind of setting, because it is one of those things where there are so many different perspectives and so many different approaches to Christianity or the church from people who are rainbow and Pasifika identities from our Pasifika allies, from our parents and our aunties and our uncles and our cousins. There are generational differences, and so I guess one of the things that I would come back to on a supporting level, um, in the context of conservatism or church, is the fact that our young people um, sometimes need space to explore and sometimes know what that looks like for them. At the end of the day, like I said right back at the beginning, we are Pacific first. And even more specifically, like in my context, I'm a Samoan first. Um, I am my father's son and my mother's son before I am a queer activist. I am part of the ngafa of my family, my genealogy, before I'm rainbow. And that identity as a Pacific person is what holds me. And it means that we need, sometimes I need space to explore what that means. What does that Pacific identity mean in the context of another identity, whether that be being a Pacific person or in some cases being a social worker or being um, a dancer, or there's lots of different conversations that sit in that space. Um, Fundamentally, if you're connecting with um, elders of the Pasifika communities, sit down and have conversations. It's about leaning into that va, and seeing where they're at and trying to offer support into that space. And if they don't want a bar of it, then sometimes you need to go somewhere else and have chats with other folks. Um, Good start point is to reach out and get the support of people who you know, um, for lack of a better term, are kind of on your side and ready to kick off that conversation. Almost like building um, champions who can then go and have those conversations with their communities, with folks who are more conservative on those scales, about end of the day, these are our children that we're talking about. These are our people, and we have a responsibility to. In Samoan, we talk about tausi leva or teo leva. Tongans talk about tauhiva, which means to look after and care. And I like to think about teo leva as more about beautifying our relationships, um, but that these these people who we might be subjugating are, are part of us. Like there's no way that we can change that. They are part of us by their blood, and by their their ngafa. Therefore, they have every right to be part of us, and we have every responsibility to care for them and hold them well.
Kia ora. Thank you for all of that, and thanks, Killian, for that question. I'm thinking back to the webinar we had with Elizabeth and Siobhan a couple of weeks ago now as well, because there was some similar kōrero in there around working with whanau, particularly, not so much with kaumatua or elders, but thinking about working with whanau who may or may not be accepting, who may or may not come from a conservative background. And Elizabeth had some really beautiful things to say about just connecting back with love and with the purpose of whanau. So I recommend going and having a listen to that if you haven't already as well. And I'm thinking, Jono, like we've talked about, but like in Auckland, there's some mothers of like queer Pacific people who like kind of have taken in ones that don't have such supporting families. And Elizabeth always talks about kind of aunties as well, that whanau is this real broad thing. It's not just the immediate nuclear family. So if parents are having a real hard time, there's often like an auntie or a cousin or somebody in the whanau who is more accepting and who can kind of help you navigate those conversations. So I think the answer to the question feels like it's real relational. It's not like there's a single answer that's going to work for everybody, but it's about building those networks. And yeah.
Totally. And one other thought just came to mind as well is that it's not just, it's, yes, it's about building those networks, but it also needs to be about solidarity. It needs to be a two-way conversation. We can't be expecting our Pasifika elders to come on and support us if we're not there to stand up for what they need as well. And that is a very Pacific, and I mean that in a pan Pacific way. That is a very Pacific concept. That um, uh, and here in Aotearoa, you might hear phrases like aroha mai, aroha atu, aroha mai, which is like sending out love and receiving love. But their framing is all over the place in the Pacific. Alofa mai, alofa atu, aroa mai, aroa atu, um, aloha mai, aloha aku. All of that idea of sending and receiving love, that it is reciprocal and that it is relational, and that that process of building together is a foundation in our cultural narratives, right? So when we talk about, hey, can you come support us, or can you support our young people who are queer, trans, or intersex and feeling isolated from the communities? Cool. Do we stand there in solidarity when our elders are fighting? And the example that I think of at the moment is, how many of our organizations or our communities are standing in solidarity with what's happening in Samoa at the moment, or what's happening over in West Papua for a very long time now. The fight for freedom, what's going on over in Hawaii with it's an ongoing conversation around not just Mauna Kea, but also around the freedom fighting that's happening throughout Hawaii. All of these social movements that we have, we need to be standing in solidarity just as much as we need the solidarity of our elders. And when we can show that we're serving our communities, then our elders are more likely, not always, but more likely to want to step in and stand in solidarity with us. So those conversations are not isolated but deeply and intrinsically linked because they talk about who we are at a base fundamental level. Oh, you're on mute, Mara.
Sorry, classic Zoom mistake. um, we're probably heading towards starting to wrap up, and I'm trying to think of a small question. I guess to kind of sum up in terms of working with young people, a lot of what you talked about seemed to just be about talking to them and listening to them about what they individually need, like not making assumptions, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so maybe in the space, it's less feeling as though you have to learn everything and know everything, and being more prepared to talk and listen to
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. It. I think you hit it on the head when you said it's relational. We need to be relational in our practice rather than process focused or best practice driven. That it becomes about building those relationships, and then all of a sudden you'll find yourself able to navigate more comfortably when you do have other queer, trans, intersex, Pasifika heritage young people coming through your doors, or you're walking into spaces where you're offering that support in a way that is relational, because you're now not focused on fixing a problem. You're focused on on building authentic and relationships that come from a place of alofa.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other resource that might be really useful for people to go and check out, especially in the context of conversations with elders and kind of leaning into that I guess messier space that is relational based practice, is some of the stuff that exists up on Village Collectives, both their website, Village Collective's website, and their Facebook page. They've got some really great stuff that they produced last year around uh, conversations between young people and their elders, parents and conversations with matua or parents of queer, trans, intersex young people.
True, it's Mussel Oi, I think, the series on Facebook. Yeah,
Yep.
we've got that linked from our website, and I'll add it to the notes and links for this webinar as well. Yeah, it's really sweet, sort of a talanoa between like 4 parents and 4 young people, youngish people, about what those relationships are like. Yeah, any other suggestions about how people can connect more with this kaupapa, what they should read, who they should talk to? Or we can share any links afterwards as well if you think of anything else.
Yeah. Um, it is an oldie, and it is a goodie, and it's not particularly about rainbow communities, um, but it is one of those things that I think can help to offer insight into our Pacific communities, both here and back in the homelands. Um, and the more and more that I think about it, it's one of these things that sat with me for years and years and years. Um, but the more that I think about this piece of writing, the more that I think it can relate in the context of relational practice and our rainbow Pasifika communities, also back home and here in the diaspora. So that is uh, Dr. Ebeli Hutwolfer's seminal text, Our Sea of Islands. And for anybody that has done Indigenous studies here in Aotearoa or has specifically done Pacific studies, you might go, oh, I've heard of this before many times. The longer you're in Pacific studies, the more you're likely to have had to go back and read it again and again and again. But I I do believe that it is a good start point to start thinking about what is the frame of mind when we're talking about relationality in a Pasifika context. And it is yes, it is an academic context, but it's quite poetic as well. So I would recommend to check it out. You can find it available online if you just Google search or Google Scholar search Our Sea of Islands. Um, and yeah, I think that would be a good start point. In terms of people to talk to, oh, that's a tough one. Um, we have our our beautiful activists who are out there. You know, people like um, Felicia Brown Acton, um, and we have our academics, and the one that I'm thinking of on the top of my mind is Dr. Patrick Thompson over at the University of Auckland. But I'm also aware that everyone is very, very busy, so I don't want to try and throw anyone on the bus and say, like, everyone, go and talk to them. But I definitely recommend that there are folks around. It's a matter of checking out uh, some of those resources and kind of seeing who's there. Um, and probably a useful source of contact for youth workers is someone like Village Collective, and just keeping abreast of what's happening in the Rainbow Valley.
Yeah, kia ora. I think we're probably at the point of wrapping up. So yeah, whawhitai lava, Jono, thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts and wisdom and experiences with us today. I'm just going to pop an ad up on screen for our next webinar. So as I said, this was the 3rd in a series. You can hop back onto our website to watch the recordings of the first 2, which were around working with takatapui, young people, and the second was around kind of intersections around intersex and trans experiences and making connections between those things. The next one that we have booked in is on the 29th of June, which is with Nate and Slay from Waikato Queer Youth. And they'll be talking about how they support young people across a really wide region. So some of the issues and differences between supporting people in a rural context versus the sort of more urban centres. You can register for that one now, and also keep an eye on our website and our social media for other dates. We might have 1 or 2 before then, depending on speakers' availability. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you are on any of those places, you can follow us. And we'll share the recording of today's webinar, as well as links to some of the resources and websites and research that Jono referred to today. So we'll wrap up there. Tofa soifua, karikia tātou. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te urutapunui kia wātea, kia māma, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua I te arataka. Koiara I rongo whakaere ake ki runga kia tina, tina, huie, taikia. Kia ora. Thank you, everyone.